Concerning COVID-19, I mean, one of the biggest challenge now is that when you are interviewing people in government, especially, not many of them are very comfortable to open up and give much more information. And so the risk is that reporting may not be very deep. And being a story that you have to tell every day, so one wonders, how else can I be able to deepen this story and not just become a tallying center, telling people today we have 800 new infections and tomorrow the same thing.
We have exactly the same issues and concerns about keeping the story going in a way. I think honestly, for the first couple of months even of this pandemic, that was a good job. Even that was a good job, because this was something we'd never really encountered before across such a global sort of spectrum. So I think the idea of just building in that regular public information was important. I'm quite lucky. I work mostly for BBC World News, so we can go all over the globe all the time in trying to find different ways of looking at the story, and that gives us a sort of broader perspective. But look for human interest stories, things that bring this to life, because that's where we struggle with the audience now. If it doesn't have that human touch, if it doesn't prick an emotion or something, and it's just more of the same, I know what viewers are doing, and you know what your viewers, your listeners, your readers even are doing. They're going off to make another cup of tea. You know, it's hard to stick with this story. We're all dulled by it after a while. Even when people are losing their lives, you're dulled by the same material. So I don't think there's anything very concrete I'm offering you other than think creatively. Do look for positive stories as well. You know, anything that keeps that story going is important. And that's also part of the public information brief, I would say. You want to be inquiring and you want to be challenging, but there are good stories as well as bad stories. There are all sorts of types of story, and don't be afraid to offer up a positive, bright story on what is a desperately negative overall picture.
Do you perhaps still have some of those sources that you get back to from your international reporting experience through Europe that perhaps you still refer to now?
You know, my producer in Brussels was brilliant. He never let a contact go. I was much more blasé, and I thought, well, we've done that story, we move on. He never let a contact go. He kept them all and has kept them all running. And you become just one of these great sources of information and people. So yeah, the contact network is critically important. You might not speak to some people for 10 years. That, you know, as long as you've maintained, you've still got their details, you still know where they are, they're not going to forget you if you've made that link in the first place. But it is one of the great sources of, if not of exclusives and scoops, it's certainly for giving you background information, for putting you back in the picture of a story. So contact's critical, yeah.
Are there any lessons that you may want to share from this COVID experience?
Yeah, I had a thought about that, and I think certainly that. In fact, where did I put a couple of thoughts down? Because I think, you know, absolutely the notion of remote has been a huge experience. It has been a learning curve for everyone. I think it's made broadcasting actually a bit more relaxed in some respects. When I started out, if I think back to when I started out, which is quite a long time ago now, you know, the news bulletin had to be like a work of art. There could be no flaws in it. It had to be perfect. And if anything went wrong, if there was a flash frame in a piece, or if a line went down, heaven forbid, well, someone would be in real trouble. And I think that is now, we're much more natural about things going wrong.
Mm-hmm. And in covering disasters or climate change, are there any specific guidelines that perhaps you could mention that BBC uses as a policy?
Yeah, I mean, BBC has pretty clear policies on, well, let's start with climate change. it is now accepted within the BBC that when we talk about climate change, we're talking about the human speeding up of climate change. So we're talking about global warming as enhanced, if I could put it that way, accelerated by humans. So obviously greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 emissions, etc. That is now accepted as the standard position within the BBC. So if you have a story related to climate change, you don't have to have Mr. Human Responsibility and Mrs. Human Denier. You know, it's fine. We recognize that that's the way. You might want to talk to someone about the speed of change, the way in which, you know, the human element is responsible or not responsible for change. So it has been decided, I think we say on our one of our training programs, the score is Manchester United 2, Manchester City 0. The referee has decided that is the score. Well, that's the attitude to climate change. You know, the referee has decided it is a human-generated issue that we're looking at. Now, in a way, that makes it easier because you don't spend your life saying on the one hand, on the other. And it is a non-stop challenge, I think, for every news organization. You're never going to have people who give up on their point of view. And as you've mentioned Twitter, same with all social media, you know, that world out there is just fighting furiously all the time. Quite unpleasant, a lot of it. But that's the BBC's position. So we know where we stand on that. And as long as that is the starting point, it does make it a bit easier to deal with stories as they happen.
Mm-hmm. And this is something that that you have done. You know, business reporting, business news, and also speaking to business people and business organizations. Do you see that there's a role for business journalism in, you know, when we talk about climate change, when we talk about disasters, when we talk about sustainability?
I think there are two things about business. It depends. It can depend how you define business journalism, because there is a Bloomberg style of business journalism, which is very heavy on minutiae of detail within a company, for example, or the way in which the stock markets are moving and why, which is certainly more granular than the sort of business coverage we would generally give. But I think if there's anything that shows, I mean, we say money makes the world go round, don't we? If anything shows how important business is, COVID-19 does to me, because this is a story which it's about all of humanity, and it's about economy. It's about, you know, what are you going to do from tomorrow when you've lost a job, etc. How are businesses going to cope? There's always that business element. The difference between COVID and, say, a disaster, I think, has been that the business element kicks in immediately. You know, when suddenly you're told you've got to shut down your, let's say it's your restaurant, or you've got to close your factory, immediately the business ramifications are huge. And nobody's died in that factory. There's no, you know, that's just really harsh realities. With a disaster, we spend far higher proportion of time on the human suffering first, and then business gradually. In fact, I think it's fair to say that business is a slightly dirty word when you start dealing with a big disaster. You just can't go there straight away. Whereas I feel with COVID-19, you know, hundreds of thousands, well, tens of millions of people in the US lost their job like that, bang. Wow, I mean, that's the biggest business story you'll ever get. When we moved onto a sort of emergency footing with COVID-19 at the BBC, our programming changed. So every bulletin was essentially a COVID-19 bulletin, hour after hour after hour. And we removed quite a lot of our other programming. And within that went some of our business coverage. And there was quite a lot of talk about, well, but this is critically important stuff. So it's come back in again. It started to sort of bleed back into the main bulletin, and it's come back in its own way as business programs. But I think some of the best material I'm getting every morning is in the business section.